in the reacts if you can see my screen. Cool, thank you. It means it's working. All right, so welcome to our workshop. So YCOM Presents #Young Free Creatives. Decides to move. Cool. Tyrone?
Hey guys, so we already kind of introduced ourselves, but yeah, so Jillian and I are the photo heads for GVA here. So yeah, pretty much this workshop is going to consist of like camera basics, um, how to read lenses, different types of lenses, and different ways of editing through different softwares on the phone and on your computer. So yeah. So yeah, the run. Oh, yeah. So the rundown of today, just explain what we do in CFC Youth. Like I said, camera settings, and then we'll be having an editing tutorial where I'll be kind of going through my workflow when editing for events or camps, and then we'll finish off with questions and have a wrap up, and then have a post workshop challenge for you guys. So yeah, we'll talk about that in a bit. So yeah, this is our docu team with our Wacom heads, Therese and Eric, who's on the top left here with the water jug. Yeah, so pretty much um, our role is to evangelize through photo and video, where because most of the time that is like the first type of thing people see outside of YFC. So usually they judge the community based off like what they see visually online through IG stories or Twitter. So it's very important that we portray our community as beautiful and as accurate as we are in like our community. So yeah. And then this is our YCOM team. This is probably like 60%. We usually we're like busy people, so we don't really have like a full complete photo of us yet. So here we have some press heads, production, video, and yeah. So now we'll go into basic camera settings with Jill.
Cool. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna pin Tyrone's video. So we're just gonna run into basic camera settings right now. So if you have a camera on you, you could probably follow along. Otherwise, you can follow Tyrone if you pin his video. So the first thing we have is manual mode. So this is usually like the letter M. So what this means is that you can customize all the settings on your camera. So yeah, you can see Tyrone with the letter M right there. The next one is aperture priority. So this is either the letter A, AP, or AV. And this does the settings for aperture. So your camera just thinks for you in terms of aperture, but you could adjust your shutter speed or ISO. Shutter priority is next. That's either seen with TV or S. And that's when the camera automatically does shutter speed for you. And then program, it's somewhat close to auto, but it's not. It automatically does settings for aperture and shutter speed. So if you wanted to fine tune your ISO, you would still have the ability to do so. If one more thing, if we're going too fast, like talking too fast, or you want to go over something, just type in the chat and we'll be able to answer your questions as well. So yeah, just let us know. Cool. The next thing we're going to talk about is shooting RAW versus JPEG. Um, RAW doesn't stand for anything. This confused me for the longest time personally. I always thought it stood for something, but it's just all capitalized letters. I don't know why. Yeah, so shooting in RAW means that it's an unprocessed photo. It's the true photo coming from the camera. It's not altered in any way. These files are much bigger. JPEGs, on the other hand, are pre-processed by your camera, so the image quality will decline a little bit. When it comes to editing, you want to shoot in RAW, because when you import these RAW files, you have more space to work around with the color, because JPEGs are 8-bit, so you are pretty limited in that. Another thing with shooting RAW is that it'll take a lot of space on your SD card. So for example, if you're shooting an event, in my experience, I have gone through so many 16 gigabyte SD cards in like one weekend. So I learned from that and I decided just to use a bigger SD card as you would. But yeah, shooting RAW versus JPEG. You want to shoot RAW if you want to edit more. JPEG, you could get away with it. It's not like the photos will be really, really bad, but if you want to play around with your editing, you'd want to lean more towards RAW. Cool.
All right, next we have types of camera lenses. So when people say like, how do you read a camera lens? It often talks about the focal length. So the focal length is the distance between the lens and the image sensor when the subject is in focus, and it's measured in millimeters. So pretty much having a smaller focal length, such as 16 millimeter or 18, you'll have a much wider angle when it comes to taking photos. And having a higher focal length, such as a 250 millimeter, will have a very zoomed in angle where you can shoot like from far. All right, first we have a zoom lens. Uh, pro, uh, the pros to zoom lenses is that it gives you a variety of focal lengths. So in this photo, we have an 18 to 55 millimeter. Here I have a 55 to 250 millimeter. You can see how much it zooms just by, yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, this is really useful for events where you don't really want to interrupt the audience by going up like in front, and instead you can just chill out in the back or kind of blend in with the audience during like talks or creatives. So yeah. And then here we have an example. Um, so in this photo, I'm taking like a landscape photo. So I want a wide angle. So here I have 27 millimeters. I was using my kit lens, which is an 18 millimeter to 55. So this is kind of like the halfway point. So yeah, you can see how I was able to capture like a wide angle, and I was fairly close to them. So yeah, this lens is very useful in this type of aspect. Next slide. Yeah, next we have prime lenses. So primes are only one focal length. So here we have an image of a 50 millimeter 1.8. I personally love this lens. It's also called the Nifty 50 because you can do so much with it. Um, I I think this is probably my first lens that I bought with my own money, and it served like 2 3 years, and I've been very satisfied with how it's, the plastic. Yeah, yeah, I've been very satisfied with the production that it's given me. Yeah, and then one of the pros to primes actually is that it forces you to move around, and I think that's one of the main things when looking into purchasing a new lens is if you want to challenge yourself and get a prime lens, which is what I did. So you could kind of become more creative. It forces you to move like to different ranges instead of just sitting in the back. But at the same time, you're challenged with only having one focal length. So if you're taking portraits, you might have to stand further back due to its zoom. And then here, yeah, I took this photo at a East CO. So here I used my Canon 50 millimeter 1.8, and then like you can see the focus is very well it's like very well done, and then you can see some bokeh in the back, some blurriness, and that's the type of camera or the type of image you'd want from uh, going for portraits, or especially like worship leaders or event speakers, and this is the lens to do it with. Yeah. Right. Next we have shutter speed, which I think Jillian is gonna talk about.
Yeah, so we're just gonna talk about shutter speed. It's pretty straightforward. So it determines how fast your camera captures a photo. So this depends on the subject you want to take a photo of. But before I get into that, slower shutter speeds equals more light, and faster shutter speeds equals less light. This is because it determines how long the shutter stays open. So for example, if I'm taking photos at a basketball game, I'd want a faster shutter speed so that I don't get any blur in my photos. So if I want to take, say, one of those late night photos of people running around with lights, those long exposure photos, I would have a really slow shutter speed so I could capture all of that blur and all that movement. So what we're going to talk about quickly is like the numbers. So if you have your camera on you, you might have seen like these numbers. It would be 1/500, 1/8, 1/2. Can I just get some quick reacts if you guys know what I'm talking about? Cool. So you guys may have seen these numbers, and it's pretty much just what nth of a second it is. So 1/2 just means your shutter is going to be open for half a second, which is a pretty long time. 1/8, 1/8, and 1/500, 1/500th, 500, 500th. That's what it's going to be. But because I have a fast shutter speed if I'm taking a photo at a basketball game, um, there are other settings that I'd want to adjust to compensate for that less light coming into the photo. Before I move on, you could just kind of see in this chart what it's talking about. So say this is a guy running. If the shutter is open for a longer time, so 1/2 of a second, you're going to catch that blur. But when you're at 1/500th of a second, you're going to have less blur in that. Cool. So in these photos, the shutter speed was 1/60th of a second. So in this photo, people were dancing, but you don't see the blur or the movement of that because of this the shutter speed. Like I mentioned before, the higher the shutter speed, less light you get coming into the camera. So the aperture is a little higher. The aperture is f4. We're going to talk about that next. And ISO is 3200. So these numbers are higher, and just keep that in mind as I explain the next thing. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah, so if you look in the chat right now, Patricia just kind of wrote 1/2 equals slow shutter, 1/500th equals fast shutter. Yeah.
Just want to add, just in case you guys don't know where it is, I have here a Canon T4i. So you can see in the menu, it'll be right beside the M, the 1/40. So that if you click on that, that'll give you your shutter speed, and then you can increase or decrease however you'd like. So yeah, continue, Jillian.
No, it's all good. yeah, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to just put in the chat. Or if I'm going too fast, please just let me know. Cool, and the next photo as well, see, it's a basketball photo. You don't see any blurred movement on the subjects, and the shutter speed here was 1/500th. Cool. Aperture. Patricia, would you like to touch on this one?
Yeah, sure. All right, so aperture is probably one of the hardest things to understand about the three settings. So if everyone can just follow along, I'm going to try to explain aperture as best as possible. Imagine if you put your hand to your eye and you have it pretty wide. Everything you see in that hole over there is pretty bright and everything seems really shallow. But if I close my hand a little bit to like a pin kind of that size, everything seems more darker or more in focus. And this kind of correlates with how aperture works with depth of field and also how it works with the light. So if you see on the screen, it says f1.4. That means it's a big aperture, which means that it's a shallow depth of field. So imagine if you put your thumb in front of your face right now and you're focusing on your thumb. That's a shallow depth of field right there. But if I was going to focus at the wall right beside me, that's probably going to be a longer depth of field. So the numbers and the facts they're kind of opposite to each other, meaning that at f1.4, it's a smaller number, but the aperture opening is actually physically bigger. And if you see on the chart over here at f22, the number is bigger, but the opening is smaller. And so how that correlates with the light is that obviously with the bigger the opening of the hole, the more light comes in, but it's more shallow. But if you go to f22, you can see that the hole is a little bit smaller, but that means everything is more in focus. So you might be asking, what kind of aperture would I use in certain situations? For example, at f1.4, I'd probably use that for portraits or very close-up objects. The reason is because bokeh is usually, it's a term that means that the background is blurry, but your subject is in focus. So if you ever seen like portraits online or on Flickr, or on the CFC-Youth Flickr page, you'll probably see a lot of portraits or close-up photos of people gathering or praying, and it's usually focused on their face, and everything in the background is blurry. That's a shallow depth of field, which means a lot more light comes in through the lens. But let's say we are shooting from the back of a stadium, and we're trying to capture a photo of the band on the stage. I'd probably want to use f22 so that everything is in focus from where the camera is all the way to the stage. However, because I'm trying to focus all the way through, I need to, I'm losing a lot more light because the opening of the hole is a lot smaller. So aperture is a little bit hard to understand, and I think it's probably best if we just try it on the camera. Usually on my Fujifilm camera, it's actually on my camera lens right there. And you probably won't be able to see it, but the dial in the inside is actually physically opening and closing as I'm turning the ring. Does that make sense for everyone? Can I get a thumbs up? Or if it doesn't make sense, let me know in the chat.
Hello? Wait, sorry, I don't know if I'm lagging right now. So, can you guys just give me a react if you can hear me? Okay, that was just a really awkward silence then. I'm so sorry. Okay, I didn't know if I was lagging. But yeah, that was aperture. Yeah, I had to call in the big guns for that because even up to this day, I struggle with explaining it. But Patricia is honestly the one person I know that could explain it, and it'll make sense. So yeah, Tyrone, do you want to explain aperture in this photo?
Yeah, so what Pat was saying, like having an aperture of f1.4 will give you that shallow depth of field. You can see here we have the singer, that's the main subject, and you can see that the surrounding is like kind of blurred out, and that's called the bokeh, where the subject is the only thing in focus. So having that 1.4, meaning it's like using Pat's example, it's like this wide. So it's at its widest. So that means a lot of light is already coming in. So that's why the shutter speed is kind of fast, which is at 100th of a second. And then ISO as to compensate any darkness that you may see. So you can have the 500. All right, next here we have aperture of, sorry, next here we have a group photo. Um, the aperture here is set at 9.0 because we want um, the entire photo coming from the lens to like the very back. We want it all to be in focus. So having it at 9.0 is very high compared to the 1.4 you saw on the previous photo. Now having it at 9.0, that means that the aperture, sorry, is getting smaller. So that means less light is coming in. So in this, we have 2/50th of a second. That's not very slow for that high of an aperture, but since the photo was taken outside, a lot of natural light is already coming in. So your shutter speed doesn't need to be as slow as it would be if you were to take a 9.0 aperture um, into a photo into a photo like shot inside, because inside obviously it's more darker compared to outside. So maybe a photo like this indoors would require a shutter speed of like 1 to 8 or something like that, something more slow to let in enough light. um yeah, that's pretty much it.
Cool. Finally, we have ISO. So this function just pretty much adds fake light to the photo. This should be the last setting that you should be toying around with. In a perfect world, when you adjust your shutter speed and aperture properly, you wouldn't have to adjust your ISO as much. Yeah, so it just adds fake light. It's really straightforward. It's just a compensator if you're in a really, really dark room. Increased ISO, this is one thing that you should really be wary of. You can get really grainy photos or really scratchy looking photos. So we'll just show you in the chart here. So when the ISO is lower, assuming that this is like perfect shutter speed, perfect aperture, you don't get anything, like it's a clear photo. However, as you jack up the ISO to like 25,000, you're going to get a lot of grain. Can I just get a thumbs up if you guys know what grain is? Cool. If you don't know what grain is, it's just essentially like noise, really scratchy photos. Yeah, and you just don't want that. When you take photos, you want them to be clear. Um, yeah, there aren't that many photographers I know that really like grainy photos or really scratchy photos. I've met a few, but when you take photos, you just want them to be clear. They'll be much easier to edit. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions about ISO? Oh, Patricia is in the chat. Yeah, so low ISO, use it for a sunny day because you don't need to compensate light when there's light. And high ISOs on cloudy and dark skies. So it'll be less light, so you might want a little bit of a brighter photo. Yeah. The higher the ISO, it could also, the photos that come out can also give you like film vibes if you like film photos, except the film photos don't look as good. And I'm not hating on film photography or editing. I'm just saying it just won't look as good. So that's why you want clearer photos. Tyrone, you want to add anything to that? Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I think you hit the spot.
Cool. Nice. So in this photo here, you can see that the ISO is really high. It's 6400. And this was because the only lights were coming from the stage lights. And the ISO was probably brought up because you wanted to see all the subjects, like the crowd. And without it being that high, it may have been like a really dark photo. In my experience, there have been like camps or events that I've shot at night, and my ISO wouldn't be high enough, and yeah, it would just be a black screen. Have you guys ever taken photos and the screen would either be like all white or like really, really dark and you can't see your subjects? Can I just get a react? I just want to know if I'm the only one that struggles. No, it's okay. Thank you. But yeah, so another thing here is we're gonna touch on editing in a really quick second. But if you were to edit this in Lightroom, if I were to increase the exposure, which is pretty much just brightening the photo, you would actually see a lot of grain, like a lot of noise. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions about the last three settings, like shutter speed, aperture, or ISO, before I move on? If you're ready to move on, just give me a thumbs up. Cool. Nice. So you can screenshot this or just look at it. This is just pretty much a really quick recap chart of what we just went over. So aperture talks about your depth of field and bokeh, so the blur in the background. And it kind of just shows you here like how big or how small the shutter would be. Shutter speed, it shows you with a moving subject, and ISO how much noise you're gonna get or how much scratchiness you're gonna get in your photos. Is everyone good? Can I move on? Okay, I'm just gonna take that as a yeah. Tyrone, you wanna add anything?
Yeah. Just kind of like how I like to take like kind of what goes through my mind when I'm taking like photos and then like go through these settings. I usually kind of identify if the subject I want to take is like moving. I mean, sorry, if the subject I want to take is still or kind of just like if it's still or moving. So I'd kind of set up my aperture first, where if I want to focus the subject, then I'll go low, so like a 1.4. So having that in mind, that's already wide, so I'll need a faster shutter speed to compensate for that light because it's open all the way. So having a shutter speed of like 500 to 500th of a second would probably suffice with what I want to kind of capture. And then if that photo isn't like kind of what I want yet, I can use ISO to compensate for bad lighting, or if I just wanted to increase the lighting in the photo. So yeah.
Before we go into editing, how are we all doing? Are we all doing all right? Would you guys like a 5-minute break? Thumbs up if you just want a really quick break. Clap if you want to keep going. Okay, everyone's clapping, so
Yeah, let's keep it going.
let's keep going.
Alright.
All right. Tyrone, you want to explain editing?
Yes. Okay, so editing. Editing software is very easy to easy to access nowadays. There are a lot of free apps where um, you can already get the basic tools of like an Adobe Lightroom on the computer. So here we have Adobe Lightroom app, Visco, and Snapseed. So could you change the last? Yes. So yeah, here we have Visco, a photo of a good friend of mine. Here I like using Visco if I wanted to get like a good quick IG story photo or something quick I want to post. Um, Visco has presets that are pretty nice. They have black and white presets, hypebeast presets, any type of preset you kind of are looking for, they usually have it. And then some, they also have presets where you can purchase, but it's up to your discretion if you want to buy that. And then here on the right, they have like the basic tools of a Lightroom. Like you can crop your image, change exposure, contrast, sharpen, clarity, and there's about like 5 more other tools that you can play around with. So it's a pretty solid app. Then here, Lightroom Mobile. Um, this is actually what I started with before having Lightroom on my computer. Uh, I kind of swapped between this and Visco just because of how easy it was to use. So here, yeah, on the left, they have for light, you can change exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows. These are tools that we'll talk about in a bit. But yeah, these are like uh, just the main tools that you'll need to kind of fix any imperfections your photo may have. And they also have presets here as shown on the right.
Yeah, I could also add Lightroom Mobile. I know edits raw photos. So if you import raw photos from like your camera to your phone, you could actually like edit on your phone on the go. Visco, do they edit raw? I think they do.
Yeah, Visco
Yeah.
and Lightroom Mobile. So you can take photos raw and then edit there. And then lastly, we have Snapseed. This app I don't use too often, but it was kind of like an alternative I kind of wanted to check out instead of using Visco. So it has the same types of presets, the looks, and then tools, like I said, tune image, details, crop, and all that. So now we're gonna talk about Lightroom. There's actually two, Classic and Lightroom CC. Classic, more it's more of a file folder based type of workflow. So if you're more into desktop work, then this is the one you'd go for. And then CC, I'm not too familiar of, but it's a cloud mobile oriented based. It's good for people who are always on the move. So I think right now I'm gonna screen share kind of how I work on Lightroom. So yeah. And if you guys have any questions, please comment in the comment section down below. Here. All right, so this is Lightroom, uh, Lightroom Classic. So yeah, well, first thing you do is import photo and then just kind of select where you want them, like SD card, something like this, Fuji. And now for myself, I shoot on Fuji, but the raw files Fuji has doesn't, or my Lightroom, sorry, doesn't kind of identify them. So I have to uh, what do you call it? Convert them, sorry, into DNG here. So I have to take an extra step, but most RAWs should be able to be imported like straight into Lightroom. So yeah, once you import it, it goes into your library. Now here I have type of like 3 photos where I'm gonna show you guys kind of like just the basics in Lightroom, just in case you guys are interested in um, getting this. So here I have this is the before and after. Um, I'll just kind of go through like what the basic settings are, or like the main ones that you guys should be using. So here we have the crop overlay. Um, this is mainly used for centering a subject, or if you want to use thirds, you can like do that or something. But yeah, usually for like this photo, I'll probably center him. And here we have spot removal. This is kind of like uh, blemish removal, where you can pick you can pick a spot anywhere on your photo, click on it, and then this circle will mimic the color, or the spot you've chosen will mimic the color of what you're gonna do. So like if I'm dragging it here, you can see that it's light, obviously. So if there was maybe like a light that I wanted to remove, then I could just click on the light and then click on the background here, and it mimic this color. But for this picture, it's not really needed, so I'll probably just skip that. Red eye correction. This is kind of like camera, like the lens correction errors that your camera may have. And then this removes that. And then we have the graduated filter and radial filter. These aren't necessary, as this type of these tools touch on tone curve and split toning, or sorry, um, these tools kind of just segregate what you want. So if I do this, everything behind this line will be changed through this. So you can see that if I want the exposure here bright, I can just drag this line here. It's kind of cool. If you want to play around with that, that's pretty interesting. And then uh, I'll just do previous here. Oh, sorry. And then next we have the graduated filter, sorry, the radial filter. And this is similar to the graduated, where it kind of just plays around with that, or sorry, it keeps whatever is in that circle stays the same, and then all the everything around it will be the one that changes. So yeah. Okay, now we're gonna move into like the more uh, important settings. So here we have temperature. This is kind of like if you want your photo to be warm or cool. So I usually my type of editing style, I go for like a more cooler look. So you can, this is where you can like play around with whether you want it to be like have a blue tint or saturated more. Then here we have tint. This is more for like the green and purple values. I usually don't touch this, but yeah, you can just play around with that. Okay, now we have exposure. Jiki kind of mentioned this earlier, but exposure is like bringing brightness to your photo, kind of just generalized brightness. This photo is kind of dark, so I like to amp it up just a bit, but not too much, because I don't want to see that grain that Jiki mentioned through the darks in this photo. And then contrast, it kind of sharpens your image, but increasing it increases the darkness. So this photo, I won't really touch that because it's already dark. So if I do that, then you won't see the detail in the hoodie or like the outline of his face. Okay, next we have highlights. Highlights focuses on the whites in the photo. So like the light areas, like on the skin, on the hand, on the jacket here. This works with your whites, sorry, whites, but this whites will increase it significantly, whereas highlights is only increasing it by a small number. So what I recommend is kind of playing around with whites first, or sorry, highlights first, and then if I need that extra umph, I use the whites slider. Like for this, um, I don't want the face to be too overexposed, so I'll probably just keep the lights like that. Now we have shadows and blacks. So these work hand in hand like highlights and whites. Shadows are the dark spots in the photo. You can see increasing it to 100. You can already see a lot of grain in the blacks here. And you don't really want that, well, depending on your type of style. But personally, oh, what's up guys? Personally, I kind of want to keep that like as minimal as possible just because of the grain. And then whites, I talked about that already. Blacks, similar to whites, it's the uh, overall like darkness. Um, so the whites and blacks values increase it much greater compared to what highlights and shadows. Yeah. If you guys have any questions about these tools, just um, feel free to comment something. Yeah. And then now we have presence. So presence has three sliders: clarity, vibrance, and saturation. Clarity kind of sharpens your image. You can see here, you can see like the outline of his head a lot more compared to having it at here. Uh, as for myself, I'd bump it up just a bit, just in case like my photo may be a tad blurry. This kind of helps it out a bit. Now we have vibrance. For vibrance, I don't touch too much just because uh, the the type of photo I'm trying to like capture, I'd try to keep it as much like very neutral colors, and with, like I said, the tad touch of blue. So I don't really touch the vibrance slider, but you can see increasing this, you can see the purple from the lights, the yellows. So everything really is brought up. And then saturation, this is if you want to make your photos black and white, you can go all the way to 0 or minus 100, sorry. And then increasing your saturation so it becomes more like yellow. You can see a lot of yellows, reds, and yeah. And then that's pretty much it for basics. Like tone curve and split toning, uh, they're more kind of advanced and kind of it's the type of settings that you'd want to play around with if you're just like curious, but you can already achieve like a good photo through the basics. And yeah, so I think, yeah, that's pretty much it for Lightroom. And then once the photo is done, I select the photos, then export, and then I select a file folder, and then if you want, you can rename it. So right now it's at PMAC because Patricia took this photo. Then I can edit, make it say something else like TLM. And then for file settings, um, I usually just, yeah, keep it at JPEG. And then for quality, usually I keep it at 100. But if you want to limit the size file, if you're just trying to send it on Messenger or something, you can just limit file size, sorry. So it doesn't take, or it isn't as big when you're sending it to someone. And then lastly, for CFC Youth, we have a watermark. So I can just click on this and then I'll actually show you guys. Edit watermark. So yeah, I have it on the bottom right now, and then opacity. Uh, so yeah, you can increase it. Not sure why it's not showing up right now, but yeah, opacity is if you want it to be translucent or opaque, and then oh sorry, yeah, that's pretty much it. And then I click export, and then the files are already on my hard drive, and then I can post it on Flickr, and then yeah, that's pretty much it.